Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome all to this webinar that IISD is hosting on the standards and the Sustainable Development Goals, leveraging sustainability standards to reporting on SDG progress. My name is Cristina Larrea, and I'm the lead of the Sustainability Standards work stream at IISD. And it is my pleasure to moderate the session with a great layout of speakers that we have today. With me, I have also my colleague, Erika Luna, Junior Policy Analyst, who's going to help us also in the moderation. In today's webinar, we offer translation into French and Hispanic, so feel free to select your preferred language. At the bottom of the Zoom platform, just click on the icon interpretation and you can select the language that you prefer. We also invite you to formulate your comments or your questions, as you have already started to do so, in the Q&A chat, as well as in the Zoom chat. We'll pick them up later on in the session. Well, 2030, that's the year that we have all in mind when thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, a common agenda that about 181 countries adopted in 2015 to accelerate progress and achieve sustainable, equitable, and inclusive societies for everybody and everywhere. We are just 7 years away of this deadline, and we are still a way to go, especially after the difficult times that we have experienced during the pandemic, ongoing conflicts and wars, and economic unrest that affects disproportionately people in situation of vulnerability in least developed countries or low-income countries. As we all know here, achieving the SDGs is a collective journey. It requires the commitment, action, and solidarity of all. Businesses, governments, civil society organizations, and all the people around the world, including us in this webinar. The United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs compiles examples of good practices of SDG implementation, of different actors coming together across the world to join efforts and drive change. There is even a global map where you can select and visualize how these actions look like. And this is very promising when all different peoples come together to drive change. Well, in today's session and the report that we are launching and we are presenting, we're going to discuss how two actors, governments and standard setting bodies, can make the most of the synergies and complementarities to work together and advance in their own jurisdictions, the Sustainable Development Goals, and report on their progress towards achieving them. And we are going to do that with an outstanding panel of speakers that we have with us here today that I will introduce you through the session. I would like now to welcome my colleague, Lynn Wagner, Senior Director of the SDG Tracking Progress Program at IISD, who will share with us some opening remarks, given her extensive experience tracking SDG implementation and reporting. Thank you, Lynn, for being with us today, and I give you the floor to share your opening remarks with us.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us. This session takes place just months before about 40 countries will be presenting their VNRs, their voluntary national reviews, to the HLPF. And so it's very timely to think about how countries could find more information, could make these reports richer, and ultimately make their implementation that much stronger. Because as we're at the midpoint of the implementation of the 2030 agenda, we've seen that progress has stalled or even reversed in some cases. So we need an all hands on deck approach, and we need to find ways to reinvigorate, to find new partnerships, to think about how this implementation is going and how it could be deepened. These partnerships with stakeholders are crucial. They're not only vital for SDG implementation, but also for reporting on progress. As we saw last month at the World Data Forum, which was held in China, there's a need for high quality, timely, open, inclusive data, not only to achieve the SDGs by the 2030 deadline, but also to measure and report on progress. And so this Standards and Sustainable Development Goals report that we'll be discussing today explores how VSS, content, criteria, and information could be used in voluntary national reviews reported to the HLPF. And in doing so, this could help close the data gap and improve the quality of reporting. By following the guidelines that are in this report, it's a very practical report on how to use VSS data in VNRs. Countries could capture stakeholder contributions to SDG implementation that would otherwise fall under the radar of national reporting efforts. And so this report offers 3 reporting examples from India, Tanzania, and Uganda, but its findings could be useful for other countries looking to enhance their reporting by bringing voluntary contributions of stakeholders, such as VSSs, into the fold. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion, and thank you very much for joining us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much, Lynn, for your very insightful remarks that remind us the role of a partnership, not only in data collection and implementation, and the importance of data quality. I'm pretty sure that these comments and your insights will, appear during the session. Before I introduce our keynote speaker today and welcome her to provide the remarks, let's have a quick look at the audience. I mean, you are joining, we have an important audience here with us today, about 90 participants so far. So we would like to hear from you, from which institutions you're representing and from which countries are you calling us. Erika, can you help us with a couple of polls? Okay, thank you for submitting your answer in the polls. That can give us a bit of a flavor of the audience today.
Here, I'll share the results, and similar from everywhere, especially Europe and North America, but welcome everyone.
Yeah, we have a good representation also from Africa, Asia, a bit Latin America. So yeah, very good. Thank you very much for submitting your answers. I think we see a diverse representation of actors as well as of countries. Excellent, welcome all. So now I'm really grateful and happy to introduce our keynote speakers of today's session. Mrs. Sakiko Fakudapar, recently appointed chair of the United Nations Committee for Development Policy, which is an independent advisory committee of experts nominated by the Secretary General. She is also professor of international affairs at the New School in New York. She has an outstanding career, including appointments, awards, prizes, publications. Her current research focuses on the politics of the SDGs and their indicators, very relevant to our discussion today. From 1995 to 2004, she led the UNDP Human Development Report that I'm pretty sure most of us have reviewed at some point. Warm welcome to you, Mrs. Fakudapar, Professor, and thank you for being with us today and looking forward to hear from your insights.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to be with you this, I mean, actually this afternoon for me, since I'm actually speaking from Britain, from Cambridge, where I am on a fellowship. So I want to just spend a few minutes giving a backdrop to today's discussions by talking about the importance of the SDGs. I mean, the SDGs have become a sort of a household word, and people don't sort of sit back and think about, what exactly is this thing? And I have been very interested in looking at how the notion of development has been redefined over the decades, and the notion of development means different things to different people. And so for me, the SDGs, in fact, they should really be called the UN 2030 Agenda, was really a milestone achievement in the United Nations in coming to a consensus across the world about the meaning of development, a sustainable development. And it brought a paradigm shift that meant that development was not just about economic growth. It was not just about poverty, as the MDGs were. It was not just about poverty in low-income countries. It was about it was certainly about poverty, but also about inequality, about sustainability, about environment, about economic prosperity, and all of these things being interrelated, because you cannot achieve one objective without the other. And all of these challenges being important, not just for low-income countries, but for high-income countries, like where I am speaking from in the United Kingdom, or where I live and work in the United States. So, you know, when you were there in 2015 in New York, you watched the rooms of the UN busy with discussion about what should be in this agenda for about 2 or 3 years. There was endless discussion with people around the world, and millions, actually literally millions of people were consulted in surveys about what was the future that they aspired to. And so I remember 2015 when the agenda was adopted, that after 3 years of intense negotiations among delegations and with lots of inputs from civil society groups, there was this kind of a real sense of achievement and euphoria. And it is in fact a visionary statement that was adopted, you know, and I think we need to keep remembering that. Particularly because the agreement was not just rehashing old blah, blah, blah. It was really new. As I mentioned, it was redefining development, but it was also because the world was at that time, and unfortunately, as we will discuss, still going in the wrong direction. There is unfettered economic growth that is breaching planetary limits, creating wide disparities within and between countries. And despite the many compromises that were inevitably made along the way, this agreement was reached to try to not just accelerate what had been done and what has been going on, but to change the direction of the world. And so this is why this is such an important agenda. And as I said, it really reversed also some of the basic ideas about what these challenges of sustainable development were, in terms of it being universal, about it being environmental, social, economic, about it being not just a sort of an aid agenda for poor countries. And it was also negotiated in a multi-stakeholder process with very important participation of civil society. And for anybody who has been following the UN negotiations, you just have to know that this was negotiated in what was called an open working group, to know that it was a very radically different process of negotiation. But unfortunately, as has already been mentioned, you know, we are midway through implementation and we seem to be going in the wrong direction, continuing to go in the wrong direction, as we have a triple crisis, the polycrisis of climate, pandemic, war. But I would say also that on top of all of that, we have the crisis of inequality that is woven around all of these other crises. And so and this is not anything that I am relating to you as something I discovered, it is well known. It is in the 2019, it is in the progress reports of the United Nations monitoring efforts that drew attention, an alert, and in the statement of the Secretary General, who has said that it is abundantly clear that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed to unleash the social and economic transformation needed to achieve our 2030 goals. And he has talked about the need to rescue, quote, rescue, unquote, end quote, the SDGs. So I think we have to see these efforts, the initiative, that we are going to talk about today in that light of the need for a much deeper, faster, and ambitious response. And here, let me just say a few words about the importance of VNRs and of reporting. The most UN declarations and agreements are sort of voted into place. And then, some of them are just shelved, and forgotten about because there is not enough follow-up. The SDGs are important also in a way that they came with a very innovative process for follow-up. And that is in the form of the high-level political forum and the submission to that forum of the reports, the voluntary national review reports by member states. The idea of this was, of course, in response to a need for accountability. But of course, in the UN, there was no agreement that there should be accountability. The governments did not want that. But we do have this, which goes some way towards an idea of an accountability mechanism, because it does provide the reporting information. But the real purpose of this is not accountability in a sense of, creating punishments for lack of progress, but it is much more of a positive instrument for sharing experiences of implementation. And that is the basic purpose of the reporting process. And so in that sense, that once again, they are a unique and innovative mechanism that create incentives for implementation and develops these elements of accountability. So in the Committee for Development Policy, we have been analyzing these reports that have been set up, and unfortunately we have found that most of them so far are not serving the purpose of lesson sharing because they're much too descriptive and not analytical. They are somewhat disconnected, in fact, from the ambition of the 2030 framework, in that they don't really sort of put forth an implementation plan or experience that is transformative, that is ambitious, and that sees the different goals in an interrelated way. So we have been submitting these reports every year to ECOSOC, proposing that the VNRs be strengthened and be made more analytical and evidence-based, and that they be much more focused on learning lessons of experience. So I think this is where the value of the IISD report comes in, and I think we will talk about it because I think it can add rigor, and I think that it provides for a deeper dig into these targets and what they actually mean, and who is what implementation activities might actually be contributing. And I hope we'll be getting more into those discussions as we move along. But the one issue that I do want to raise is I think that much as this tool is focused and analytical, the other side of the story is that I think it's difficult to implement the whole thing entirely. We do have 17 goals and 232 indicators or something like that, 170 something targets. But I think that's not, I think one needs to have an implementation strategy that recognizes that this is something that has to be kind of contained as with a particular focus at a particular point of time. but I see that as something we have to discuss today. So thank you very much. I stop here. I probably went on for too long. Sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Fakura. Very, very useful, your insights, the background of the information behind the SDGs and the importance of gathering evidence and showing evidence of implementation of SDGs and having that implementation strategy that I'm pretty sure we can talk with our guest speakers today. Thank you very much for your clarity on this. I would like now to invite my colleague Elena Kosolapova, Senior Policy Advisor at IISD and first author of the report that we are discussing today, to present the main findings. Welcome, Elena, and thank you for sharing with us the findings of the report.
Thank you so much, Christina. We are here to examine the findings of our new report on how voluntary sustainability standards, or VSS, can help governments advance the SDGs and report on progress. Based on the poll results, I hope the report's findings will resonate with you and your work and support it in many ways. So welcome and thanks again. Today, I will talk about what the SDGs and VSS are, and how they interact. I will then touch upon where we stand in terms of SDG progress and talk about country progress reporting and the obstacles that countries face. And finally, I will present some key takeaways. As I'm sure many of you know, the 17 SDGs and 169 targets are part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development countries adopted in 2015. The 2030 Agenda outlines an ambitious vision for people and the planet to be achieved by 2030. The SDGs, as our keynote speaker noted, span the economic, social, and environmental dimensions and range from ending poverty and hunger to boosting productivity, reducing inequalities, and halting biodiversity loss. According to the 2030 Agenda, SDG implementation and follow-up processes are meant to be participatory and inclusive and should include all levels of government, civil society and the private sector, members of parliament, national human rights institutions, and many others. Partnerships among stakeholders are an effective vehicle for SDG implementation and are key to reporting on progress. Now, what are voluntary sustainability standards? Standards are market-based tools established mainly by non-state actors to help achieve sustainable development outcomes. They set production requirements, apply methods that aim to guarantee compliance, and offer supporting services to producers. There are more than 400 standards in the world. They all operate in different sectors and are all different. They're grounded, encourage multi-stakeholder collaboration, and could be leveraged to implement the SDGs. According to the UN SDG Progress Report released last month, many SDGs are moderately to severely off track. Of approximately 140 targets with data, only about 12% are on track, about half are moderately to severely off track, and around 30% have either seen no movement or even regressed below the 2015 baseline. And while the lack of progress is universal, developing countries and the world's poorest and most vulnerable people are bearing the brunt of it. It all goes to show that it is now more important than ever to join forces in the spirit of partnership for the goals and step up our efforts if we are collectively to achieve the SDGs by the 2030 deadline. As many of you will know, countries are encouraged to track and report on their progress toward the SDGs through voluntary national reviews, or VNRs, which they submit to the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, or HLPF, every 4 years or so. Through their VNRs, governments have the opportunity to share experiences, identify areas needing more attention, and find ways to work in partnership with stakeholders. However, there are obstacles that can make reporting challenging. A lack of data is one such challenge, and many governments cite it as one of the main barriers to reporting. And now we would like to engage with you one more time and ask, how many VNRs do you think mention data availability as one of the main challenges to reporting? The correct answer is 43%, but you are not too far off. All right. In 2020, data availability was cited as the top challenge by 20 of the 47 reporting countries. Data availability, as reflected in countries' VNRs, improved somewhat in the following years, yet data and monitoring continue to pose difficulties for many presenters. The UN Secretary General's SDG Progress Report urges governments to strengthen national and subnational capacity, reap the data dividend, and take SDG monitoring, follow-up, and review to the next level. Now, there are opportunities to strengthen collaboration between governments and initiatives such as VSS, who work with producers, buyers, and governments in many developing countries to advance the SDGs. And such partnerships can also help countries report on SDG progress. We found that there is a great deal of crossover between the sustainability goals of voluntary sustainability standards and the SDGs. And this is in alignment with other studies. So here's what we asked. If the linkages are there, can we and how would we leverage them in a way that would support governments and promote policy coherence to advance the SDGs? And the second question we asked is, can we build on synergies between government action and VSS to report on SDG progress? And our answer, as you can see, is an unequivocal yes to both questions. We use the following methodology for our research. First, we benchmarked the environmental and social requirements of 13 standards against 10 targets of 5 SDGs, where previous publications have found high alignment. These are SDGs 2 on zero hunger, 6 on clean water and sanitation, 8 on decent work and economic growth, 12 on responsible consumption and production, and 15 on life on land. The geographical scope of the VSS we considered varies. You can see them all on your screens. Some are international, such as Rainforest Alliance of Fair Trade. Others are regional, such as ARSO, or national, such as India Organic. These VSS cover specific commodities. Second, we reviewed the latest VNRs submitted to the HLPF by India, Tanzania, and Uganda. And finally, we conducted literature review of VSS activities and results in these countries. Here's what we found. VSS can help governments advance the SDGs, some more so than others. Information on VSS requirements and activities conducted in country can help report on SDG progress. And governments can implement 5 steps to use VSS information for their VNR reporting. We found that the VSS have high coverage of criteria that support our selected targets under SDGs 6 and 8. We found moderate coverage of criteria that support the targets of SDGs 2, 12, and 15. In terms of coverage of criteria aligned with our selected targets, we found that the VSS have high coverage of criteria that support both targets of SDG 8, both targets of SDG 6, and SDG target 12.4. We also found that the VSS examined have low coverage of criteria that support SDG targets 15.2 and 2.3. Now, what does this mean in practice? It means that there are many areas in which VSS can advance the SDGs. For example, the VSS examined have high coverage of criteria that support soil conservation, health and fertility under SDG 2, water quality and water use efficiency under SDG 6, respect of ILO conventions under SDG 8, prohibition of hazardous chemicals and their lower use and proper application under SDG 12, and monitoring and protection of high conservation value areas under SDG 15. We also found that there are potential areas for improvement where the VSS can help advance the SDGs. For instance, we found low coverage of criteria that support living wage, access to financial services, especially for women, and reduction of solid waste and monitoring of high carbon stocks. We then used the results of our benchmarking and the UN Secretary General's voluntary common reporting guidelines for VNRs to develop 3 so-called reporting examples for Tanzania, Uganda, and India. We selected these 3 countries based on the presence and coverage of standards, the VNR reporting cycle, all 3 have reported to the HLPF at least once, and past IISD research and data availability. There we offer some concrete examples of how VSS content criteria and information about their practical implementation on the ground can be incorporated in a VNR to report on SDG progress. So how did we do that? We identified the VNR sections as outlined in the UN Secretary General's Common Reporting Guidelines for VNRs that could benefit the most from inclusion of such information. These are the 10 sections recommended for inclusion in the Secretary General's guidelines. I have highlighted the ones we deemed the most relevant in yellow. As you can see, the sections range from institutional mechanisms to progress on the goals. We found VSS data could be particularly valuable for reporting on progress on specific SDG targets, particularly by using case studies of how sustainability standards perform on the ground. Here are some examples of VSS good practice and results in Uganda, India, and Tanzania that we have included in our country reporting examples. For example, for Uganda, we highlight training of women coffee farmers to diversify their sources of income and to access land tenure. For India, for instance, we mention obtaining lower water consumption levels and providing safe drinking water. For Tanzania, for example, we note pay and benefits to tea workers that exceed legal requirements. Now, what we did next is this. Based on our benchmarking and the 3 reporting examples that provide suggestions of what VSS information could be included in the relevant VNR sections, we then developed a set of guidelines that other governments could use as well. The guidelines explain how best to leverage VSS data and information for SDG progress reporting to the HLPF. We suggest governments follow the following 5 steps. First, we recommend They identify processes for stakeholder engagement in the preparation of a VNR. VSS could be invited to participate in workshops, platforms, or provide information. This information can then feed into the section on methodology and process for preparation of the review. Second, we suggest governments identify institutional approaches and arrangements for SDG implementation that can facilitate information gathering for reporting on progress. These could include capacity building and awareness raising efforts on the role different actors can play in SDG implementation, monitoring and reporting, and boosting partnerships. This information could then be included in the VNR section on institutional mechanisms. Third, we recommend governments identify relevant VSS content criteria and gather evidence. Governments could use our benchmarking exercise or request information or case studies directly from VSS. This information could be included in the VNR section on progress on goals and targets. Fourth, we suggest governments describe how VSS engage with local actors and help address data availability challenges. This information could be included in the section on the means of implementation. And finally, we recommend governments select and elaborate case studies to report on SDG progress target by target. This step can help illustrate with clear examples how VSS operating in the country can help advance a number of SDGs. And this information could then go into the section on progress on goals and targets. Finally, let me highlight some key takeaways. First, we see greater progress towards the SDGs when standards have mandatory, time-bound commitments towards sustainability. Therefore, we think VSS could do more to introduce such commitments and improve data collection, though it is important to acknowledge that smallholder farmers could have greater difficulty in complying with criteria with time-bound and mandatory requirements. Second, standards often have mechanisms in place to monitor and evaluate their impacts, so they can help governments fill data gaps. They can also provide examples of how they have overcome shared challenges and helped advance the SDGs in their jurisdictions. Third, standards have the potential to deliver benefits beyond the areas their content criteria cover, providing additional contributions to the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. And this is an important finding, as it speaks to the integrated nature of the goals and the critical role that synergistic approaches play. And finally, standards can play a role in supporting sustainable development beyond 2030. Regardless of whether or not we achieve the SDGs by the deadline set in the 2030 Agenda, there is the question of what happens next. While we don't know what future holds, we do know that standards are embedded in multi-stakeholder partnerships that include farmers, buyers, extension services, and investors. And as such, they can help governments build coherence among different actors, chasing similar goals in ways that not only promote the 2030 Agenda, but also support sustainability post-2030, however it may look like. Thanks very much. And over to you, Christina.
Thanks very much, Elena, for outlining us the main findings of the report with clear examples on how governments can use and collaborate with sustainability standards to advance implementation of SDG and report on progress. Thanks very much. Now I would like to, perhaps we can stop sharing the screen because we're gonna start with the dialogue with our great speakers that we have here today. Following the keynotes and Elena's presentation, I am very happy to introduce you all to our panelists today. We do have with us Mr. Alex Walkuba, Commissioner for Crop Production of the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries of Uganda. We also have with us Mr. Chariton Namuwosa, Chief Executive Officer of the National Organic Agricultural Movement of Uganda. We do have also Mr. Rijit Sengupta, Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Responsible Business, joining us from India, and Mr. Utita de Souza, Chairman of the Global Sustainability Solutions and former Chief Negotiator for the UN SDGs and advisor to the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Wildlife in Sri Lanka, joining us from Sri Lanka. I would like to apologize because our invitee, Mrs. Vidya Rangan, Senior Manager, Impacts and Innovation of ICL and Alliance, was not able to join us in the end today due to a sickness or illness. So we wish her like a prompt recovery. So let's start, as we have welcome all of you to our session today, and thank you for giving us a bit of your time for your busy schedule to be with us. As we have seen in Elena's presentation, one of the country examples that we have examined is Uganda. And we have today Mr. Chariton and Mr. Alex, who work closely with producers, business, and the government and the organic standard in this country. So let's start with Chariton. You lead Nogamo, which is a strong umbrella organization that gathers and unifies organic producers, processors, exporters, and other institutions in Uganda to promote organic farming and marketing of farmers' products. At the moment, your country has the largest number of certified organic producers after India. How can governments and standard setting bodies better communicate, coordinate their efforts to advance the SDGs with producer groups and private sector actors? Could you give us some examples based on your expertise?
Well, thank you very much, Christina, and thanks for the opportunity to be a panelist at this important webinar that is looking at the nexus between voluntary sustainable standards and the sustainable development goals. I'll start from your statement that Uganda has the largest number of certified farmers in Africa, and it's only second to India in the whole world. And I would like to quote one of our ministers, specifically the Minister for Agriculture, Minister of State for Agriculture, the Honorable Bwino Chakulaga, who on 2 occasions has made a powerful statement that organic agriculture in Uganda, and by extension, agroecology, is Uganda's culture. We have 80 to 90% of our farmers being smallholder farmers who are involved in various practices that are very close to organic farming. And that makes us naturally an organic country, if you like. Now, going to the question, I feel we have a clear opportunity to bring together the voluntary sustainable standards, certification bodies and other stakeholders, and together with government, to be able to demonstrate that the data that these voluntary sustainable standards, certification bodies collect in their activities can very much contribute towards, the reporting on the sustainable development goals. Clearly, we have seen and participated in many capacity building activities in Uganda, where we support smallholder farmers to comply with different standards. And I could give several examples of farmers that have demonstrated a clear progress from being involved in what you call bad practices that would have a negative impact on the sustainable development goals, different sustainable development goals. And after some time, through different interventions, capacity building, different trainings, there is a clear progress in terms of addressing some of the issues that would otherwise, be impacting negatively on the different sustainable development goals. I'll give you an example. In the central part of Uganda, in central Uganda, we have farmers that are involved in the pineapple value chain. And as you might know, our pineapple is the sweetest in the world, arguably the sweetest in the world. And that creates a lot of demand for our pineapple locally, regionally, and internationally. And our farmers are constantly, faced with opportunities to sell their pineapple, and they take advantage of this by, expanding their production, increasing agricultural productivity. And one of the things that they do, which is not very good, especially the farmers that are not certified, is where they go and open land in forested, areas and clear, trees. And that means they are obviously impacting negatively on the environment, even as they are trying to increase production and increase incomes. But when voluntary sustainable standards come in, the organic standards, the East African organic standards against which these farmers are certified, we see compliance against the different criteria. And when certification is issued, you can actually see a clear difference between a farmer who has not been part of the certification program and those that have actually complied with the different standards. So there has to be a clear, a clear step towards bringing together the certification bodies and government and other stakeholders to be able to communicate and share some of these experiences, both good and bad experiences, that would obviously demonstrate how Uganda is working towards, developing the different, criteria that impact positively on sustainable development goals.
Thank you very much, Shaiton, for outlining these clear examples on, how standards can collaborate with governments to advance training and good practices in Uganda. You mentioned something in particular about the collecting of data, and that, farmers could be involved in that collection of data to report on progress. How can we support farmers and communities, to collect that data on progress of their practices they adopt and results obtained? What challenges and opportunities exist on these regards to support them?
First of all, my organization and working in collaboration with other stakeholders and with support from different, international development organizations, especially the French Development Organization. We've worked together with different actors to come up with criteria, simple criteria, that farmers can use to collect different sets of data on their activities. And that takes care of issues like income, issues like agricultural, let's say production, how they are improving soil productivity, and a number of other aspects that clearly show that they are progressing in terms of addressing their poverty issues, in terms of addressing issues of yield and of course marketing and all the others. And most importantly, showing how as a country, and now that's at aggregation level, showing how as a country we are progressing in terms of integrating more and more farmers and building their capacity to comply with the different standards. And that we did that last year. We started last year, and we organized the first ever Organic Agriculture Week, where we had a dialogue, a national dialogue that brought together different stakeholders, where we were able to recognize the best performing actors, including, of course, farmers. And that happened for the very first time. And that was in partnership with our Minister of Agriculture and Industries and Fisheries, the very, very first award that we dubbed Uganda Organic Excellence Awards. And present at this dialogue was the Office of the Prime Minister, representative, the third Deputy Prime Minister, and the Minister of Agriculture, and our very commissioner here, who also got an award as one of those actors that champion the cause for organic agriculture in Uganda.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mr. Tarleton. You shared clear examples on how you have supported farmers to collect that data with clear criteria and also providing awards, for performance. This is very insightful for the dialogue. I would like now, we continue in Uganda. I would like now to invite Mr. Alex, who has a remarkable experience working at the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries of Uganda, promoting policies and regulations that support sustainable agriculture, agroforestry, conservation, and organic farming. Alex, thank you for being with us today. Which type of public policy priorities does organic farming help the government of Uganda to advance? Could you give us some examples?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. IISD, Team IISD, our keynote speakers, panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alex Luakwa, Commissioner Crop Production Department from the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, based at Entebbe, Uganda. Thank you for the opportunity to be one of the speakers and one of the panelists at this webinar. Thank you very much for that offer and opportunity. And also thank my colleague and partner and friend, Mr. Tarleton. Back to the question. I'll start with the overarching development policy, development framework, and that is the Vision 2040. In Vision 2040, our key priority is socioeconomic transformation from peasant to modern and a prosperous country. So that is an overarching priority. The second one is sustainable production, productivity, and value addition within the National Development Plan. The Vision 2040 is operationalized through 6 5-year national development plans at national level. At local government level, we have the district development plans. At sectoral level, we have the sector strategic plans. But we are now in the implementing the 3rd national development plan. And the key priorities promoting sustainable production, productivity, and value addition in key growth opportunities, and if you like, sectors. And the second one is strengthening the capacity of private sector to drive the growth that we desire, to create jobs. And the third is consolidating and increasing the stock and quality of strategic infrastructure. And we also have a key priority within NDP3, and that is enhancing human development, human capital development. And we also have want to do with improving service delivery. And then you go down, we also have key priorities, for example, in competitiveness, improving competitiveness, and then poverty eradication, which is SDG 1, if you like, and reducing, addressing food and nutrition security, or ensuring food and nutrition security, as well as reducing malnutrition in the country, and fostering sustainable agriculture. And we have also one priority to do with mitigating climate change consequences. And these are some of those priorities that I can talk of at national level. At sectoral level, at the Ministry of Agriculture level, we have within the National Agriculture Policy, objective number 5 is to do with ensuring sustainable utilization of the natural resources. I can mention those for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex, for outlining the priorities that, or the standard that operates now, one of the standards that operate in Uganda help you to address. Maybe just before we move to another of our speakers, I would like to ask you another question. You have been very involved in a synergy, in an example of a synergy, which is between the standards and the government action, which is the implementation of the National Agricultural and Organic Policy. What has been the benefits of building these synergies, you know, with a particular sustainability standards and a policy?
Yeah, thank you very much. The key one right away is fostering the partnerships between the government, between the private sector, and implementers of these policies, and like organic agriculture policy or sustainable agriculture policies, strategies, initiatives, and plans. So, forging partnerships. Where there are partnerships, there is complementarity. You know, where resources are limiting, partnerships help to cultivate complementarity, and complementarity will, will help to leverage the limiting resources. The second point I can talk to is that there is increased volume, increased production of quality materials, quality food, that can attract competitiveness. That can attract competitiveness in the local, in the regional, and international market. So there is improving access to markets. For example, organic products has been improving access to international markets. There is improved profitability because there is a premium offered for organic products. So there is improved profitability, improved income on the side of the actors or the investors in organic. So there is improved profitability. But there is also improved sustainability, because in organic farming, when we adopt organic farming, then the opportunities for sustaining production, for sustaining the utilization of the resources, for sustaining the management of the environment are high. So there is increased sustainability in our operations, in our agribusiness transactions. But I also want to say that these partnerships, the synergies will help us also to foster implementation of the SDGs. For example, I've already mentioned SDG 1 on poverty, SDG 2 on food security and malnutrition and sustainable agriculture, responsible consumption. So it helps us to foster implementation of the SDGs. That is what I can say for now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Wakuba. Very, very clear suggestions on the benefits of linking organic standard with policy action. And we will come back to you later on and with some reactions for the other panelists. I would like now to move to, I would like now to move to the other country that we have representative here from, and that the report that Elena presented touched upon. And I would like to invite Mr. Rijit, which is the lead of the Center for Responsible Business in India. And in India, we have a number of sustainability standards that already operate. Some of them are international in different sectors, others are local, such as personal trustee, etc. And so thinking of your work in India, and you lead the center that you lead, that's a prominent work with the private sector actor and producers groups to help them integrate sustainability into their core business practices, often with the use of VSSs. And the center is quite active with a number of business groups there in India. Thinking of your work and your expertise that you do, how can we increase different stakeholders' awareness and understanding of VSSs as potential tools to advance the SDGs? And what role can partnership play in this process? Mr. Alex just mentioned about the partnership. So can you give us some examples on this from your experience in India?
Sure. Thanks, Christina, and thanks for the invitation to the Center for Responsible Business to be part of this very august panel. So I think, and thanks for that very important question about building and strengthening awareness. Before we get into the answering the question of how do we build awareness, I think what is most important is awareness of who and why does it matter to build the awareness of the stakeholders as far as the VSS stakeholders are concerned. So if you look at the various VSS stakeholders, and my my co-panelists have already highlighted. So there are two kinds of stakeholders who are critically and keenly engaged in the VSS process from a sustainable development goal perspective. One is the sort of the actors in the ecosystem, and this comprises, of course, the VSS themselves, the wider stakeholders, maybe even the consumers, and of course the policymakers. So that's the sort of the wider ecosystem in which the VSS stakeholders sort of sits, and the ones which are most critical and crucial are the users of the VSS, and these are the businesses themselves. So when we look at businesses, and this is essentially from India's experience, there are broadly three kinds of businesses who've been engaged in terms of considering and using VSS in pursuing various sustainability agenda and of course linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is done sometimes deliberately and sometimes not. And these are large corporations. So as far as large corporations are concerned, especially in sectors like tea, coffee, spices, and also on thematic issues like water stewardship and so on, a number of large corporations have been using VSS. However, the most critical sort of stakeholders in the business whose awareness is important to be improved, especially to ensure that there is a wide uptake of VSS, are the small and medium enterprises and the smallholders. When we talk about industries in this part of the world, even in India, the industry is about 85% small and medium enterprises. So if you want to increase the awareness, if you want to increase the uptake of VSS and therefore the awareness, the most important sort of category of stakeholders are the small and medium enterprises and the smallholders and the small farmers and their institutions. So now we come to the point of how do we sort of improve and engage these stakeholders, build their awareness and hopefully uptake as well. Now, in terms of the small and medium enterprises, what is most important, especially, is their ability to integrate into global value chains. So, and that essentially is the business case and should be the business case for for embracing VSS. So, if the VSS organizations are able to support and help the small and medium enterprises to integrate into global value chains, which has been happening in India to a limited extent in the apparel and textile sector, to a certain extent in some of the stone sector, natural stone sector, to a certain extent in home furnishing sector as well, and also I mentioned some of the agri-food commodities. So small and medium enterprises are key in terms of improving uptake, especially in this part of the world. And if you're able to identify and help them sort of help create awareness of how it helps them in integrating into global value chains, that's definitely an area to go. In terms of the smallholders, which is the other category of stakeholders who are critical, again, as colleagues from Uganda mentioned, there is also some interesting partnerships which are happening, and and of course, also fair to say that in both, as far as these two categories of stakeholders are concerned, perhaps the VSS organizations might not be able to engage with them directly, because if you look at the VSS organizations, even in India, they have maybe one person or two. They don't have a huge presence in I mean, look at the size of the country. So partnership is the only way to go, and there have been very interesting partnerships that, especially in the in the agri sector, with as far as oil palm is concerned, as far as regenerative cotton is concerned, and so on and so forth. A large number of interesting sort of partnerships are happening. The idea is to see how these partnerships can be strengthened, and to enable to ensure that what is critical is to see how we are able to introduce the ecosystem actors into this process. And I mentioned them earlier, and one of them definitely is the government. So you'll be happy to know that in the VNR that India had reported, I mean, presented in 2020, for the first time, there was a reference to voluntary sustainability standards in the VNR. And that really highlighted that of the various conduits available for pursuing SDGs by the private sector, VSS definitely can be one of them. So if you're able to sort of, identify and document, which we are trying to do at CRB to a certain extent, of how,
You're on mute. You just muted, Bridget, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Okay.
So I'm saying, if you're able to document how, the VSS are being used by the smallholders and also the small and medium enterprises in ensuring that they are able to scale up, they're able to get integrated into global value chains, and also the kind of partnerships that VSS are having with, various other organizations in each of these sectors. I think that will give a lot of motivation to the industry and to the producers, to answer that question of why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why does VSS matter? And help them not only in ensuring that they are sort of pursuing specific impacts and targets, but also sort of establishing systems and processes and management standards to help them in sort of in pursuing that in an organized manner. So I'll stop there if that's okay with you, if I'm able to answer your question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bridget. I think the idea of building partnerships and creating partnerships to reach smallholder farmers to be able to benefit from sustainability standards, I think is key, and it's true. I think it's a reality of India and other countries. And perhaps I would just have a follow-up question. Have you any action the government have done in India to support those partnerships, creating those partnerships? And then we will move to our next. Any action that you would like to highlight?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to highlight one action and maybe one aspiration. So the action is essentially at the level of the the Quality Council of India, which is a government autonomous entity. A process has been initiated of developing a platform on private sustainability standards, which essentially provides a great opportunity for sort of raising the visibility within the policy circuit about the voluntary sustainability standards or the private sustainability standards as they're referred to. So that's an initiative which is very interesting. Of course, there are ways in which it can be sort of energized and made a little bit more active and so on and so forth. But the initiative is definitely very, very encouraging. The aspiration essentially is, going forward is, as you are aware, India is a federal country. So a lot of the policies get sort of developed at the national level, and then the implementation happens in the state. So all the action really happens in the states. And the state government has, it's is mandated to develop policies on specific areas, for example, agriculture, or even thematic areas like, like labor and water. So therefore, if the VSS community is able to align itself with some of those priorities, both in terms of those sectors and also in terms of impact at the state level, that will really help the state. And of course, in India, very, very quickly, there is a system through which an element of competitive federalism is instilled among the state, and there's an assessment of SDG performance across the state, which you might have seen. So if you are able to, if the VSS community are able to engage with a particular state in a particular manner, that kind of partnership can actually help the state in reporting their SDG performance better when it comes to that national level sort of analysis of how different states are ranking, against each other. So that's a direction in which the VSS community will have to think about, and there are some interesting leads. But what I think our keynote speaker mentioned is that the response has to be deeper and faster, and it cannot be business as usual. So I think that's the direction in which we should be.
Thanks very much, Mr. Regis and Gupta. Very insightful. They need to trickle down, and go to a state level and further down to build these partnerships and
my apologies that I will actually have to drop off because there's something to attend to. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we know we are a bit running late, but thank you, Richard. We will follow up. We have still an audience there, and if you allow me 10 minutes more, 10, 15 minutes to arrive to the hour, I would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Ruchita, which is a strong advocate of sustainability and strategies for shaping policy in its support. And in your former, quality of chief negotiator for the UN and advisor of the Ministry of Sustainable Development, how can governments facilitate information sharing by sustainability standards to improve national reporting on the SDGs? Could you provide us some examples based on your experience?
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, IISD, for a timely initiative. Unfortunately, we are having this discussion, or fortunately, in that sense, where a midterm review shows that we are nowhere of achieving sustainability, which means that the commitment to the transformation has been once again dumped by nations and leaders of nations. This exactly happened with the Agenda 21 in the 1992 run to this. Second part is that I don't think we should forget the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which says that the choices that we are making continue to harm Earth. Now, said that, about your question, government sustainability, first of all, have governments and have people realized that the 169 targets are sustainability standards themselves, help for a world. And we keep on trying to figure out how to plug in other stuff. Now, which means that when you bring in all the voluntary sustainable ability standards, which are also voluntary, we try to enhance the global agenda. And what has the VNRs done so far? The voluntary national reviews by countries, who do they represent? Do they represent their nations to start with, or do their people know there are VNRs? Not even the policy community in most of the countries are engaged in the VNRs. These are just reports that come and just end at high-level political forums, which is not a high-level political forum, which just goes through annual motions like the Commission for Sustainable Development used to do before. Now, the second part of this is that the VSS, the voluntary standards, sustainability standards, are commercial tools, or are market tools. And these have also had huge problems. Now, these voluntary standards are all over the place. Now, if you look at the current EU's anti-greenwashing laws are becoming extremely important, because the voluntary standards are not providing the transformation the world has been looking for. And that it is the same for the climate agenda, it is the same for the sustainability agenda, which are the same agendas. Now, the issue is that can the VSS help enhance the reporting of nations or assessment of SDGs? Most definitely. But then the voluntary sustainability standards must have serious accountability and transparency. If you look at the corporations, they will come up with their annual reports, and that's all that the public gets. Not even governments have been able to get into the information that is so harmful from societal point of view, climate point of view, progress point of view, transformation point of view. And these reports only mean sustainability awards and accolades. I mean, it's like monkey praising his own tail. Now, are we going to keep on looking at this? There is quite a bit of mapping between the sustainability standards and the SDG targets that has happened. Now, the next question is that this obtaining information. Now, governments continue to say that there's no information. There is information, but does it translate into national statistics? Do you take independent information from a farmer? Do you take from a fisherman? Do you take from a vendor? And do you make it into national statistics? Or you have your own modules that create what is called national statistics, and the central bank and your research agencies, your standard institutions, and your reporting institutions will manipulate it to show a country that is far different from where a country is living. Example, Sri Lanka, which is going through. So finally, on this question, if the VERs are to benefit from VSS, governments need to closely monitor the claims made by corporations and the standards that they are. It's too easy to obtain standards and show off, but I think we must take a leaf of what the European Union is doing of the anti-greenwashing laws. And I think that is a starting discussion.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mr. Uchita. I think you call for the need to incorporate not only this information that governments can use them, but also the importance of the accuracy of that information and the veracity of the information, which is very prominent. For the sake of time, I mean, we have had a very insightful discussions from all our panelists. I would like to, get some questions from the audience. Erika, can you please share with us a couple of questions from the audience, 2-3 questions, and after we can just do a round of key takeaways.
Yes, we have 2 questions that are very similar, so I'll just merge them together, but they both relate to how SDGs and VSS, or more like how VSS are supporting gender equality. So that'll be SDG 5. We have that from someone, I don't know their name, but also from Anita, who's coming from the Women in Renewable Energy Association in Nigeria. She's wondering about this.
Yeah, maybe that question can go to Mr. Chariton. And Chariton in Uganda, can you give us perhaps some example how VSS can help advance gender equality?
There are quite a number of voluntary standards, and I could highlight that very helpful in advancing, gender equality. You have the Rainforest Alliance, which again is one of the key voluntary standards in Uganda. The East African Organic Product Standard, the Uganda Organic Standard, and other standards. They have a set of criteria that point to the fact that farms or agricultural farms are required to put in place an environment that fosters, gender equality. We have in the past been training farmers using the approach that we've dubbed the Farmer Family Learning Group, where the family as a group, the husband, the wife, the children, and all the other members of the household required or advised or encouraged to sit together and plan. And they plan in terms of how they are going to acquire, let's say, inputs and which kind of inputs they are going to use, how they are going to share labor, activities that relate to production. And then most importantly, and as you know, most of the decisions relating to the sales proceeds after the women and the children and all the other members of the household have done everything to produce, the men decide to spend the money without the to sit together and even plan on the proceeds, from the sales that have been made for the different crops. So yes, very much in line with the different voluntary sustainable standards.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chariton, for answering that question. Other questions that might be in the chat, we will be able also to address them in writing form. We don't have the time today. Well, I would like just to, since we are over the time, I would like to give the word to our panelists here and to have a final round of key takeaways. And starting with Uchita, what do you think are the takeaways to strengthen collaboration within standards and governments for advancing SDG and reporting on SDG progress? One key takeaway that you would like to highlight to the audience today.
I think why we are not progressing is because we have not had inclusive transformation. We are talking about everything as SDGs, but we have forgotten that the agenda is for a transformation, and a transformation must be inclusive. Whether you plan, whether you implement, whether you monitor, whether you report, and if not, you're not going to bring in voluntary standards also into the table. You will exclude everything and then write reports and then go to the same negotiation tables.
Yeah. So the importance of inclusivity. Thanks very much, Mr. Uchita, for that takeaway. Lynn, can you help us also with a key takeaway for the discussion?
Well, I think to build on both what Uchita just said, but also what Professor Fukuda Par said, the SDGs are a transformative agenda, a new direction. 10 years ago, we wouldn't be discussing the role of VSS in national planning, in international discussions at the HLPF. But I think that we have to be careful that that we're using proper data, that the VSS are really doing what they say they're doing, and that is the inclusive conversation of stakeholders double checking, having a voice to say what's really happening on the ground, what they're seeing, governments having a chance to look at what's happening, to make the regulations work, and the voluntary standards of the partners need to be developed in an inclusive manner.
Thanks very much, Lynn, for that great takeaway. Mr. Alex Wakuba, could you give us a takeaway of the discussion today, how to strengthen collaboration between governments and VSS to advance SDG and reporting progress?
I think what I can think of is how to attract commitments. I mean, within a partnership, the various parties must be committed, but how do we strengthen commitments? Because being part of this process, inclusivity, yes, I may be included when I'm not committed. How do we enhance commitment on the side of the partners? That is what I can leave.
Excellent points, Mr. Alex. How do we enhance commitment? That's a very important point on this. And Mr. Chariton Nabunsa, could you give us also your final key takeaway before we close the webinar?
Thank you very, very much. And before I forget, thank you very much for the opportunity that you've given us to highlight how we see the connection between voluntary standards and the sustainable development goals. And my key takeaway here is that we need to be intentional in providing platforms that give an opportunity for the different stakeholders to identify examples or cases of successful, farmer groups or associations or actors, manufacturers, processors that are doing an excellent work in terms of advancing the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tarek. I think the issue of platform came up quite a few times from Bridget, from you and other speakers. So it's a final word that we share with you all here at the webinar. Thank you all the speakers for your very valuable insights, for being with us today. And thank you also for the audience. You have been very engaging. All the questions that have not been able to answer, we will be able to respond. And when sharing the recording of the webinar, we will also share the answers of those questions that were not addressed. And thank you for staying with us. We were a bit over all the time, but the discussion was very worthy. Thanks, everyone. And as a next step, we will share the recording of the webinar, the report, and keep an eye on the SDG summit in September, the midpoint, where different countries will do the assessment on where we stand and what we need for that ambitious progress, as our keynote speaker mentioned earlier on. Thanks very much. Have a great evening, afternoon, and day, and thank you all for being with us today.